At 14:05 hours on September 12, 1943, Hauptsturmführer Otto Skorzeny watched his glider pilot release from the tow cable at 1,800 meters altitude. Below them, the Hotel Campo Imperatore sat on a boulder-strewn plateau at 2,100 meters elevation. The landing zone that aerial reconnaissance had identified as flat grassland was actually a 30-degree slope covered with rocks. The glider dropped toward it at 160 kilometers per hour. Skorzeny had 90 seconds before impact. Behind him, 9 more gliders were releasing from their tow planes. Inside each glider, 9 German soldiers sat in darkness, waiting. The glider hit the slope at 14:07 hours. The landing skid caught on rocks. The fuselage tore through boulders. The glider stopped 30 meters from the hotel entrance. Skorzeny and his men kicked open the doors and ran. 300 meters away, 200 Carabinieri guards stood at their posts, weapons ready, watching German troops emerge from crashed gliders. No one fired. The story begins 50 days earlier, in a conference room inside the Palazzo Venezia in Rome, where the Grand Council of Fascism was voting on a motion of no confidence against Benito Mussolini. The date was July 24, 1943. Mussolini had ruled Italy for 21 years. He had created the fascist state. He had sent Italian armies to conquer Ethiopia, Albania, and parts of Greece. He had declared war on France and Britain in 1940. He had sent troops to fight alongside Germany and Russia. Now, in July 1943, Sicily was under Allied invasion. American and British troops had landed on July 10th. Italian coastal divisions had collapsed. German reinforcements were fighting a delaying action toward Messina. The invasion of the Italian mainland appeared imminent. The motion passed 19 votes to 7. King Victor Emmanuel III, exercising powers he had held but never used, ordered Mussolini arrested. At 1700 hours on July 25th, Mussolini arrived at the Villa Savoia for what he believed was a routine meeting with the king. Carabinieri officers arrested him as he left. A Red Cross ambulance drove him to a barracks in Rome. The fascist regime ended. Marshal Pietro Badoglio became prime minister. One of Badoglio's first acts was to open secret negotiations with the Allies for an armistice. Adolf Hitler learned of Mussolini's arrest within hours. His response was immediate. Mussolini must be located. Mussolini must be rescued. Italy must remain in the war under fascist control. If the Badoglio government sought peace with the Allies, Germany would occupy Italy by force and install Mussolini as head of a puppet regime in the north. Hitler assigned the rescue mission to competing organizations. This was standard procedure. Competition ensured multiple approaches and prevented any single organization from becoming too powerful. Generaloberst Kurt Student, commander of German airborne forces, received orders to plan a military rescue. Reichsführer SS Heinrich Himmler ordered his intelligence service to locate Mussolini. SS Hauptsturmführer Otto Skorzeny received assignment to lead the SS search effort. Skorzeny was 35 years old. He stood 198 centimeters tall and weighed 98 kilograms. A scar ran from his left cheekbone to his chin, the result of 14 fencing duels during his university years in Vienna. He had joined the SS in 1933 and served as a combat engineer on the Eastern Front until March 1943, when shrapnel wounds ended his line service. In April 1943, he received command of SS Sonderverband ZBV Friedenthal, a special operations unit being formed to conduct sabotage, reconnaissance, and unconventional warfare behind enemy lines. Skorzeny had no special operations experience. He had no intelligence training. He had never conducted a rescue operation. His qualifications consisted of loyalty to Hitler, membership in the SS, and a reputation for aggression. These proved sufficient. Hitler personally briefed him on July 26. Find Mussolini, report his location, prepare rescue options. The Italians moved Mussolini every few days to prevent German rescue attempts. On July 27th, he was on Ponza Island, 110 kilometers west of Naples. On August 7th, he moved to La Maddalena Island off the northern coast of Sardinia. On August 28th, a seaplane flew him to Gran Sasso Massif in the Apennine Mountains, 140 kilometers northeast of Rome. The Hotel Campo Imperatore would be his final prison. The hotel had been built in 1934 as a ski resort. It sat on the Campo Imperatore Plateau, at 2,100 meters elevation, accessible only by cable car from the valley below. The cable car station at Asergi sat at 1,100 meters. The cable traversed 1,000 vertical meters over a horizontal distance of 3 kilometers. Travel time was 20 minutes. The hotel could accommodate 200 guests in 50 rooms. In August 1943, it accommodated 1 prisoner, 200 carabinieri guards, and hotel staff who had been ordered to remain. Skorzeny located Mussolini through a combination of intelligence work and luck. German signals intelligence intercepted Italian police radio traffic, mentioning special security arrangements at an unspecified mountain location. An SS agent in Rome learned from a grocer that he was delivering fresh fruit daily to La Maddalena. When Skorzeny investigated La Maddalena, the grocer mentioned seeing an important prisoner. Before Skorzeny could act, the Italians moved Mussolini again. A Luftwaffe reconnaissance aircraft photographing the Apennines for unrelated purposes captured images of Gran Sasso showing unusual vehicle activity at the cable car station. An intelligence analyst noted this and forwarded the images to SS headquarters. Skorzeny flew a reconnaissance mission on September 8 disguised as a Luftwaffe doctor, supposedly evaluating the plateau for possible use as a malaria research station. The mission confirmed Mussolini's presence. Hotel staff recognized him even though he was traveling in civilian clothing. September 8 was significant for another reason. On that date, Italy announced its surrender to the Allies. The armistice became effective immediately. Italian military units were ordered to cease hostilities and await Allied instructions. German units throughout Italy received orders to implement Operation Eiche, the plan to disarm Italian forces and occupy the country. Within hours, German troops were seizing Italian military installations, disarming Italian soldiers, and securing strategic positions. The Gran Sasso raid was scheduled for September 12. Students' paratroop units would conduct the actual assault. Skorzeny and 16 SS troops would accompany them to ensure SS participation and claim credit if the operation succeeded. Major Harold Moores commanded the ground element, a paratrooper battalion tasked with securing the lower cable car station and blocking Italian reinforcements. Oberleutnant Georg Freiherr von Berlepsch commanded the airborne assault element. The assault would use DFS-230 gliders. These were specialized assault gliders designed to deliver troops directly onto objectives with minimal warning. The DFS-230 had a wingspan of 21.1 meters and length of 11.25 meters. Empty weight was 770 kilograms. Loaded weight approached 2,100 kilograms. The fuselage was steel tube construction with wooden wings and fabric covering. 10 men could sit inside. 6 facing forward and 4 facing backward. The pilot sat in front. Entry was through doors at each end. The DFS-230 could be towed by various aircraft. For the Gran Sasso mission, Henschel Eiche 126 reconnaissance aircraft would serve as tow planes. The Eiche's 126 was not ideal for this role. It was a 2-seat observation aircraft with a single 710 horsepower radial engine. Maximum speed was 356 kilometers per hour. Towing a loaded glider reduced this to 190 kilometers per hour. But about 126s were available at Pratica di Mare airfield near Rome, and availability outweighed optimal performance. The gliders would release at 1,800 meters altitude, 5 kilometers from the target. The pilots would glide silently toward the hotel, approaching from the east to use the morning sun as cover. Landing would occur on the plateau immediately adjacent to the hotel. Total flight time from release to landing would be approximately 5 minutes. The assault force would exit the gliders, secure the hotel, locate Mussolini, and signal for extraction. Extraction presented difficulties. The plateau was too small and too high for conventional aircraft operations. Parachute extraction was impossible. The cable car was too slow and too vulnerable. Student proposed using a Fieseler Phi 156 Storch, a short takeoff and landing aircraft capable of operating from extremely confined spaces. The Storch could land on rough terrain, load passengers, and take off in under 200 feet with favorable wind. The plateau offered approximately 250 feet of usable surface. This would require precise flying, but was theoretically possible. The Storch was a high-wing monoplane with fixed landing gear. Wingspan was 14.25 meters. Length was 9.9 meters. Empty weight was 860 kilograms. Maximum takeoff weight was 1,320 kilograms. The Argus AS-10 engine produced 240 horsepower. Maximum speed was 175 kilometers per hour. Minimum speed was 50 kilometers per hour. Landing speed was 50 kilometers per hour with full flaps. Takeoff run in calm air was 213 feet. Landing roll was 61 feet. The critical specification was capacity. The Storch was designed for 3 people, including the pilot. Extracting Mussolini would require the pilot and 1 passenger. Adding a second passenger would exceed design limits but remained within structural capability if the distance was short and the aircraft did not need to climb above 3,000 meters altitude. The plan finalized on September 11th. 12 gliders would launch from Pratica di Mare at 1300 hours. 10 would carry assault troops. 1 would carry Skorzeny and his SS team. 1 would carry Italian General Fernando Soleti, who had been recruited to convince the Carabinieri not to resist. Moores and his paratrooper battalion would move by road to Acergi and secure the cable car station simultaneously with the glider assault. The Storch would land 30 minutes after the gliders secured the hotel. At 0700 hours on September 12th, the assault force assembled at Pratica di Mare. Glider checks revealed problems. 2 gliders had damaged skids from previous landings. These were replaced with gliders from training units. The replacement gliders had not been inspected recently. During pre-flight checks, 1 developed control cable problems that could not be repaired quickly. The mission was reduced to 10 gliders, 100 men instead of 110. Weather over the Apennines was marginal. Cloud base was 2,000 meters. Visibility was 8 kilometers. Wind at altitude was 20 kilometers per hour from the northwest. Surface wind at Gran Sasso was estimated at 15 kilometers per hour, favorable for landing but problematic for takeoff. The meteorology officer recommended delay. Moores overruled him. The Italian armistice was 12 hours old. German control of central Italy was still being established. Any delay risked Italian discovery of the plan or Allied intervention. Launch occurred between 13:05 and 13:10 hours. The tow planes climbed to 1,000 meters and turned northeast. Flight time to the release point was 62 minutes. The gliders flew in formation, maintaining spacing of 200 meters. Inside the gliders, the troops sat in darkness. The fuselage had no windows. They could hear wind noise and engine noise from the tow plane. They could feel when the glider turned or climbed. They could not see where they were going. Von Berlepsch flew in the lead glider. His tow plane climbed to 1,800 meters and turned toward the release point. The other tow planes followed. They were supposed to loop southwest over the Alban Hills to gain additional altitude before turning toward Gran Sasso. This would provide margin for the glide and allow the gliders to approach from multiple directions simultaneously. Skorzeny, flying in the 4th glider, ordered his tow plane pilot to skip the loop and release immediately. He claimed later that he wanted to ensure his troops arrived first and secured the hotel before the Fallschirmjäger could claim credit. This disrupted the formation. The gliders behind Skorzeny released early to maintain cohesion. The planned simultaneous approach from multiple directions became a staggered approach over 10 minutes. At 14:05 hours, Skorzeny's glider released. The tow cable fell away. The glider was silent except for wind noise. The pilot could see Gran Sasso ahead, a massive plateau of rock and scrub vegetation. He could see the hotel, a 3-story rectangular building with a red tile roof. He could see the landing zone. What aerial reconnaissance had identified as flat grassland was a boulder field on a 30-degree slope. The pilot had no choice. The glider was committed. He aimed for the least rocky section and deployed the dive brake, a parachute that streamed from the tail to increase descent rate and reduce ground speed. The glider descended at an angle of 60 degrees. The landing skid contacted rocks at 100 kilometers per hour. The skid broke. The fuselage struck boulders. The fabric tore. The wings flexed and held. The glider stopped 30 meters from the hotel entrance after sliding 120 meters. Skorzeny and his men kicked open the doors. They ran toward the hotel. Carabinieri guards watched them approach. The guards held rifles. They did not raise them. General Soleti, who had traveled in Skorzeny's glider, shouted in Italian not to shoot. The guards lowered their weapons. Additional gliders landed over the next 8 minutes. One crashed completely, killing the pilot and injuring 4 troops. The others landed successfully, though all sustained damage to landing gear and several had torn fuselage fabric. By 14:13 hours, 85 German troops were assembled on the plateau. The Carabinieri made no hostile moves. Skorzeny ran into the hotel. He carried a submachine gun. His men followed with rifles and grenades. They encountered no resistance. Italian guards stood at their posts but did not interfere. Hotel staff pointed toward the upper floors. Mussolini was in room 201 on the second floor. At 14:15 hours, Skorzeny reached room 201. He opened the door without knocking. Mussolini sat at a window, looking out at the confusion on the plateau. He turned as Skorzeny entered. Skorzeny spoke in German. "Duce, the Führer has sent me to rescue you." Mussolini stood. He embraced Skorzeny. He replied in German. "I knew my friend Adolf Hitler would not abandon me." The rescue was complete. Total time from glider landing to securing Mussolini was 8 minutes. No shots had been fired. No casualties on either side except the glider crash injuries. The Carabinieri had offered no resistance. Many would claim later that they had been ordered by their commander, General Coeli, not to resist because fighting would accomplish nothing and cause unnecessary deaths. Extraction remained problematic. The Storch had not yet arrived. Radio contact with the aircraft confirmed it was en route, but delayed by the same weather that had complicated the glider approach. The Storch would arrive at approximately 1450 hours. Meanwhile, Moores had reached the cable car station below and secured it without resistance. The lower end of the operation was complete, but getting Mussolini off the mountain required the Storch. The aircraft appeared at 1450 hours. Captain Heinrich Gerlach piloted. He circled the plateau twice, evaluating wind and surface conditions. The landing zone was worse than briefed. Boulders covered most of the plateau. The only relatively clear area was a strip approximately 200 meters long and 50 meters wide, running northeast to southwest. The slope was 25 degrees. Wind was 15 kilometers per hour from the northwest. Creating a crosswind component, Gerlach landed at 1455 hours. The Storch touched down on the slope and rolled approximately 40 meters before stopping. The left main landing gear struck a rock during the roll, damaging the strut but not collapsing. Gerlach shut down the engine and assessed damage. The landing gear was functional but weakened. Takeoff would be risky but possible. Skorzeny escorted Mussolini to the aircraft. Mussolini wore a civilian suit and carried no luggage. Gerlach helped him into the rear seat. The Storch was designed for 3 people total. Skorzeny insisted on accompanying Mussolini despite Gerlach's objections that the added weight would make takeoff impossible. Skorzeny claimed he had been ordered by Hitler personally to escort Mussolini to safety. This was probably untrue but served his purpose. He climbed into the aircraft. The Storch now carried 3 men weighing approximately 240 kilograms plus full fuel, approximately 100 kilograms. Total weight was approximately 1,380 kilograms, 60 kilograms above maximum design weight. Gerlach protested. Skorzeny refused to leave. Gerlach accepted that he would attempt takeoff overweight. German troops cleared rocks from the takeoff path. They positioned themselves along the slope to push the aircraft if necessary. Gerlach started the engine and ran it to full power. At 15:15 hours, he released the brakes. The Storch rolled downhill. The troops pushed. The aircraft accelerated slowly. At 60 kilometers per hour, Gerlach pulled back on the control stick. The Storch lifted off after a ground roll of approximately 75 meters. The aircraft dropped immediately. The plateau fell away beneath it. The Storch descended 300 meters in the first 10 seconds, falling toward the valley floor. Gerlach held full power and gradually gained airspeed. At 100 kilometers per hour, he began climbing. The aircraft cleared the ridgeline by 50 meters and turned southwest toward Rome. The flight to Pratica di Mare took 40 minutes. Gerlach landed at 15:55 hours. Mussolini and Skorzeny transferred to a Heinkel He 111 bomber for the flight to Vienna. From Vienna, they flew to Hitler's headquarters at Rastenburg in East Prussia. They arrived on September 15th. Hitler greeted Mussolini personally and announced plans to install him as head of the Italian Social Republic, a puppet state that would control northern Italy while Germany fought the Allies in the south. The propaganda value was immediate. German radio announced the rescue on September 13th. Newspapers published photographs of Skorzeny with Mussolini. Joseph Goebbels commissioned a documentary film showing the glider assault. The narrative emphasized German daring, German efficiency, and German loyalty. Mussolini's rescue demonstrated that Germany protected its allies and would not abandon them even when militarily defeated. Hitler personally awarded Skorzeny the Knight's Cross on September 14th. He promoted him to Sturmbannführer, equivalent to major. He praised the operation as a masterpiece of special operations warfare. Skorzeny became famous overnight. German propaganda called him the most dangerous man in Europe. International media repeated the phrase. After the war, Skorzeny wrote memoirs that further embellished his role. The actual command structure was more complex. Student had planned the operation. Moors had commanded it. Von Berlepsch had led the glider assault. Skorzeny had participated with 16 SS troops out of 85 total. But Skorzeny positioned himself to be photographed with Mussolini. He gave interviews emphasizing his personal role. He accepted credit that properly belonged to the Fallschirmjäger. Student and his officers were furious. Moors demanded that Student correct the public record. Student refused. Challenging the SS was dangerous. Heinrich Himmler controlled German internal security. Correcting the narrative would require accusing Skorzeny of lying. This would create political problems that Student did not want. He accepted the injustice and ordered his officers to remain silent. The injustice persisted for decades. Skorzeny published his first memoir in 1950 and a second in 1976. Both emphasized his central role in planning and executing the rescue. Historians accepted his account because alternative sources were limited. German military records from the period were incomplete. Many Fallschirmjäger officers died before they could provide testimony. Skorzeny lived until 1975 and controlled the narrative through his memoirs and interviews. The historical record began to correct in the 1990s as researchers accessed additional documents and interviewed surviving participants. These sources revealed that Student had planned the operation, Moors had commanded it, and von Berlepsch had led the assault. Skorzeny had participated, but had nearly derailed the operation by disrupting the glider formation and insisting on overloading the Storch. His contributions were significant, but not decisive. The military assessment was more balanced. The operation succeeded because the Italians chose not to resist. The Carabinieri were loyal to the Italian state, not to the Badoglio government. They had no interest in dying to prevent Germany from rescuing Mussolini. General Coeli had reportedly ordered them not to resist. Whether this order came from Coeli alone or from higher authority remained disputed, but the result was clear. The guards did not fight. The glider assault was skillfully executed despite Skorzeny's disruptions. The pilots landed successfully on difficult terrain. The troops exited quickly and secured the objective. The lack of resistance simplified the tactical problem, but the Germans had prepared for resistance. They carried sufficient firepower to overcome 200 defenders if necessary. The operation would have succeeded regardless of Italian cooperation, though with significantly higher casualties. The Storch extraction was the most dangerous phase. Gerlach's flying skills saved the mission. Takeoff overweight from a boulder-strewn slope at high altitude exceeded the aircraft's design parameters. That the aircraft lifted off and climbed successfully demonstrated exceptional piloting. That Skorzeny insisted on overloading the aircraft demonstrated poor judgment. Had the Storch crashed, both Mussolini and Skorzeny would have died, rendering the entire operation failure. The strategic impact was minimal. Mussolini established the Italian Social Republic in northern Italy, but it was a puppet regime with no real authority. German forces occupied the territory and made military decisions. Mussolini provided political legitimacy but not operational capability. The regime survived until April 1945. When Allied and Italian partisan forces overran northern Italy, Mussolini fled toward Switzerland, was captured by partisans on April 27th, and executed the following day along with his mistress, Clara Petacci. The operational lessons were documented in Luftwaffe after-action reports. Glider assaults required detailed reconnaissance and precise intelligence. Landing zones must be evaluated accurately, not assumed from aerial photographs. Towplane selection affected formation, integrity, and timing. Glider pilots required extensive training for operations in confined terrain. Command relationships between competing organizations created confusion and degraded operational effectiveness. The SS and Wehrmacht rivalry damaged German military effectiveness throughout the war. Hitler deliberately encouraged competition between organizations to prevent any single power base from threatening his control. This created redundant command structures, confused authority, and credit disputes that diverted attention from operational effectiveness. The Gran Sasso raid succeeded despite this dysfunction, not because of it. Post-war analysis identified the Italian decision not to resist as the decisive factor. German military capability was necessary but not sufficient. Without Italian cooperation, The operation would have succeeded militarily, but with casualties that would have reduced its propaganda value. Dead German paratroopers and dead Italian guards would not have supported the narrative of daring rescue. The operation succeeded perfectly because it encountered minimal resistance. The Carabinieri perspective received little attention. They were soldiers following orders in a country that had just switched sides in a war. Their king had overthrown Mussolini and signed an armistice with the Allies. German forces were occupying Italy under Operation Eiche. Fighting to protect Mussolini served no Italian interest and would cause casualties for no purpose. They chose not to resist. This was rational given the circumstances. But Italian propaganda after the war portrayed it as cowardice. The hotel staff remembered differently. They reported that Mussolini appeared resigned to his fate. He had expected Hitler to attempt rescue but had not believed it would succeed. When Skorzeny appeared, Mussolini expressed gratitude but not surprise. He understood that his political career was over. The Italian Social Republic would be temporary. Germany would lose the war. His role would be ceremonial. He accompanied Skorzeny because he had no alternative. The hotel remained operational after the war. The cable car continued service. Tourists visited the plateau to ski in winter and hike in summer. Room 201, where Mussolini had been held, became known to visitors. The hotel management eventually placed a plaque noting the historical event. The plaque mentioned Mussolini's imprisonment and rescue but provided minimal detail. The tone was factual rather than celebratory. In 1993, the Italian Military Research Service published a comprehensive study of the Gran Sasso operation. The study examined German records, Italian records, and testimony from survivors. It concluded that the operation was well planned and competently executed, but succeeded primarily because the Carabinieri chose not to resist. The study criticized Skorzeny for claiming credit disproportionate to his contribution, and praised the Fallschirmjäger for professional execution under difficult conditions. The study also noted that several Italian officials, including General Soletti, may have been secretly cooperating with the Germans. Soletti's presence in Skorzeny's glider and his immediate intervention to prevent resistance suggested prior coordination. Whether this coordination extended to higher levels of the Badoglio government remained unproven but seemed probable. The study recommended additional research into the political context of the armistice period. Modern special operations doctrine treats Gran Sasso as a case study in air assault tactics and political military operations. The technical execution was professional. The tactical surprise was complete. The extraction under difficult conditions demonstrated adaptability. But the operation succeeded because the political context favored German action. Italian resistance was minimal because Italy had already effectively surrendered. The gliders used in the operation were destroyed by German forces to prevent Italian capture. The Storch that extracted Mussolini continued service until it was destroyed in an air raid in 1944. None of the aircraft involved survived the war. Replicas have been constructed for museums, but no original equipment from the operation exists. The plateau at Gran Sasso remains as it was in 1943. The hotel operates as a ski resort. The cable car provides access from the valley. The rocks and boulders that complicated the glider landings remain scattered across the slope. Visitors who know the history can identify where the gliders would have landed. The slope is steep. The rocks are substantial. Landing there in a fabric and wood glider required skill and courage regardless of whether resistance was expected. Skorzeny's reputation persisted through the Cold War. He was captured by American forces in 1945 and tried for war crimes in 1947. He was acquitted on charges of improper use of American uniforms during the Battle of the Bulge. He escaped from detention in 1948 and lived in Spain until his death in 1975. He worked as a military advisor to several governments and maintained contact with former SS officers. He never acknowledged that his account of Gran Sasso exaggerated his role. Von Berlepsch survived the war and lived in West Germany until 1979. He rarely discussed Gran Sasso publicly. When asked, he emphasized that Student and Moores had planned and commanded the operation. He described Skorzeny as a participant who had disrupted the glider formation and nearly caused mission failure by overloading the Storch. His testimony provided the basis for historical reassessment of Skorzeny's role. Moores died in 1968. Student died in 1978. Both men had seen Skorzeny claim credit that belonged to their troops. Both had remained silent to avoid political complications. Their silence enabled Skorzeny's narrative to dominate for 30 years. Only after their deaths did historians begin systematic reassessment based on primary documents rather than Skorzeny's memoirs. The operation's significance lies not in military innovation, but in propaganda effect. The raid demonstrated that Germany could conduct complex special operations despite deteriorating strategic position. It showed that Hitler would support his allies even when doing so served minimal military purpose. It provided a morale boost at a time when German forces were retreating on multiple fronts. The propaganda value exceeded the military value by orders of magnitude. Mussolini's rescue changed nothing strategically. Italy remained divided between Allied-controlled South and German-controlled North. The Italian Social Republic contributed minimal military capability. Mussolini's presence provided political legitimacy for German occupation, but did not affect combat effectiveness. The raid succeeded tactically and failed strategically because it accomplished a militarily irrelevant objective perfectly. This is the paradox of Gran Sasso. The operation was well planned, competently executed, and tactically successful. It achieved its immediate objective with minimal casualties. It generated significant propaganda value. It demonstrated special operations capability, but it changed nothing about Italy's role in the war. Mussolini was rescued and installed as puppet leader of a German-occupied territory. He had no real authority and no ability to affect the war's outcome. The raid is remembered because it was dramatic. Gliders landing on a mountain plateau, a famous prisoner rescued, a daring escape in an overloaded aircraft. These elements create narrative interest. But military history judges operations by strategic impact. Gran Sasso had minimal impact. It demonstrated capability without achieving strategic purpose. The Fallschirmjäger who planned and executed the operation deserved credit they never received. Skorzeny claimed fame he did not earn. The historical record corrected eventually, but the correction came too late to matter to the men involved. They died, knowing that credit had been misallocated and that political considerations prevented correction. The Gran Sasso Plateau remains unchanged. The hotel stands. The cable car operates. The boulders that complicated the glider landings remain where they have always been. Visitors can walk the slope and imagine gliders sliding through rocks toward the hotel. The imagination requires no exaggeration. The actual events were dramatic enough.